world is changing fast. New technologies are impacting how we think about products, services, and the way we live our lives. Nowhere is this trend more present than in financial services, where new business models and customer expectations are changing our conceptions about banking, finance, and the very nature of money. Welcome to Rebank, a visionary podcast about banking, fintech, and the future. The future of banking is here. Hello and welcome to Rebank. I have the great pleasure today of being joined by David Robson. David leads IBM's Watson business in the European financial services sector. Watson is a cognitive computer that can read, understand, reason, and engage with humans in support of a broad range of knowledge workers across medicine, banking, and insurance. David has been working with Watson for 2 years, advising banks and insurance companies on how to deploy cognitive technology within their operations. Before joining the Watson Group, David was a partner in IBM's consulting business, where he ran IBM's analytics practice for the UK and Ireland. Over the course of his career, David has had the opportunity to work with a large number of banks and insurance companies across Europe and brings interesting perspective into what AI can do, both within Watson and more broadly. David, welcome to Rebank.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So, I've given a brief intro on your background and your work at IBM, but tell us in a bit more detail what you're working on at the moment.
Yes, so my job is to lead Watson Group for financial services across Europe, and I spend a lot of my time talking to clients about how we might help them transform their business using cognitive computing and artificial intelligence. So really, I'm out running workshops with clients, talking to clients, holding conferences, that sort of thing. Just trying to spread the word really about what we could do with cognitive computing because it's such a new technology for most of our clients.
And your clients run the gamut of financial services companies? Is it incumbents and startups and banks and insurance companies?
Yeah, so it's the full spectrum of those type of organisations. More focus really on the larger corporates, so the larger banks, financial services companies, insurance companies, those types of things. Some work with startups, but they tend to be earlier and smaller in their phase. So, but yeah, most of the big financial services institutions. Is
the reason you work predominantly with larger companies because that's where you can add the most value, or because they're the ones innovating around the areas that Watson's most relevant to?
Yeah, I think they're the ones that are doing most of the innovation because they have a large business already. They're looking for transformational advantage that they can gain. You know, typically you'll find with a startup is they're very focused. They've got a specific, set of technology or application that they're bringing to market, and they're very focused on deploying that. The larger, the banks, the financial services companies, the insurers, typically they have those businesses already, and they're looking at how can they take costs down, how could they improve their revenue line, top line growth, that type of thing. So yeah, naturally we spend more time with them. And also in IBM, we have better relationships with those type of organizations as well.
Describe Watson for those who aren't familiar with it.
So Watson is a cognitive computer. It's basically a platform of services that allow companies to build cognitive applications. So, at its heart, Watson's a computer that can read natural language. It can understand what it's read, and then it can apply that knowledge in a number of different ways. So, for example, it could engage with users and have a conversation with them about a particular use case. For example, support a mortgage application or an insurance claim or something like that. It can also discover things, so it can read documentations, pull out insights. We might look at an organization's annual report and accounts or newsfeed, spot something in there about a new business partner in China, and therefore the organization could offer a hedging instrument, for instance, in support of that. So that's discovery. There's a whole bunch of other use cases we can do around visualization, that type of thing. But basically, it's a learning, thinking computer.
And in terms of kind of the tangible interaction with the technology and its implementations in their current form, you talked about how it can read and digest information, and it can effectively output new information off the back of that. How does information go in, and how does information come out? And how much flexibility is there for users?
Yeah, so as I said, Watson can read effectively. So you give it written documents, it reads them, it digests them, it annotates them. how that is used is very much dependent on the application. So you might read a document, generate some insights, and then feed it up through a next best action algorithm or something like that to a banker or a wealth manager or a relationship manager. Equally, you could communicate through a mobile phone, through Facebook Messenger or whatever it might be, so that you're having a direct conversation with an end user and you're surfacing Watson's insights as part of that conversation. So really any of the channels that exist today, be it web, mobile, face-to-face, can be either Watson can be delivered through those channels. It's not inventing a new channel approach really. It's providing intelligence behind the channel.
And I believe there's a robotic form of Watson, i.e. a human-like robot. Is that right?
Yeah, so there are two physical robots that we sometimes use to bring a physical manifestation to Watson. They are Neo, which is quite a small robot, and Pepper, which is a bit larger and kind of rolls about. And you can talk to those as you talk to a human. However, they are a tiny percentage of what we do with Watson. So most of our Watson interactions aren't through physical robots. They're through websites, they're through mobile phones, they're through back-office systems, Watson responding to emails through an email channel. So the physical robot, quite rare these days. We don't see a lot of that type of interaction.
In terms of split between back-end functionalities, back-office functionalities, and front-office functionalities, is it more information being read and digested in the background so processes can be improved, or is it more replacing contact centers and providing information?
I would say this technology is still quite new, and most of our customers are they're dipping a toe in the water. They're working out how they might be able to use this technology to transform their business. Most are starting from a kind of a client engagement point of view. So Watson's reading information about the products they have to sell, the processes through which they serve them. Watson's reading it, understanding it, and engaging with their customers in a natural language conversation about whatever it is, selling a mortgage or servicing an insurance.
So, for instance, if I'm interested in applying for a mortgage, rather than speaking with a bank representative or visiting a branch, I might speak with Watson, whether that's by a voice channel or a text.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And Watson would be able to answer preliminary questions, high-level product-related questions around that mortgage?
Yeah, whatever we train it in. So if we train Watson in a basic level of conversation, it could have a basic level of conversation. If we train it in depth, about the details of a specific offset mortgage, then Watson would be able to engage around those details. So that's typically how our clients are using Watson at the moment. Watson's just as applicable in the back office, particularly in the insurance domain around underwriting claims, that type of thing. But fewer of our clients have got that far yet in their transformation programs. So we're seeing some proof of concepts, that type of thing, but we're not doing very many major implementations.
You mentioned the learning or the training component a couple of times. Can you tell us more about that? I mean, how does that work in practice? Yeah,
so basically you feed Watson with the information that you want it to know about. So effectively documentation, Microsoft Word, PDF documents, that type of thing. So you feed that into Watson. Watson reads it, annotates it, stores it, so that it's available for it to access later. So then, if somebody asks Watson a question, it's able to recall what it's read in those documents and give them an answer. If Watson's looking for particular information within those documents, then Watson can find it, interpret it, and then do something useful on the back of it. But it's, it has modern development tools, web-based tools. It's very easy to load documents into Watson to generate sample questions in order to train Watson. And then you have to tell Watson whether it got an answer right or wrong as part of the training process, so that it gradually kind of gets better and the accuracy of its answers improve. So it's a bit like having a child and training it in a particular domain.
So do you train Watson with a specific outcome in mind, i.e. you're not just uploading documents, you're uploading documents with a set of specific instructions about what Watson should be learning to do with that information?
You effectively load Watson with information pertaining to the topic that you want it to engage on, and then you ask it a sample set of questions in order to train it and check that it's getting the answers right. So when you first implement an instance of Watson, its accuracy won't be as high as it will be when you've taken it through 2 or 3 training cycles. How accurate it is depends on the quality of the information that you give it and things, but it will iteratively improve as you train it, and then at some point you go live, and then you need a kind of a program to continue its learning, to give it new information so that it can continue to improve. But you have to be slightly careful with that because, of course, if you give the public the opportunity to train Watson, it can go in the wrong direction. So we would always encourage supervised learning.
For a new use case or for new subject matter, for instance, that mortgage example from before, how long would it take to start to live in order to train Watson?
We're doing a proof of concept at the moment with a bank on exactly that use case. It's an 8-week proof of concept. We'll have a working functional chatbot in one particular domain of mortgage in that time. If you wanted to cover the entire domain of mortgage, you'd probably be double that period. So 16 weeks, 4 months, that sort of order of magnitude to build out a use case. Relatively small team of 4 or 5 people. Half of them working on things like tone of voice, style, that type of stuff, and the other half physically building the chatbot.
That's a good point. I suppose one element is communicating information or providing information, and another element is doing that in a natural way that results in a positive experience with the customer.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine it's much more difficult to start to move toward human-like interactions and things like recognizing tone of voice and behavior and even register and matching those and thinking about when you do or don't match those. Is that something that you guys work through with Watson?
We focus exclusively on the words that are spoken or the words that are typed. So we're not looking at things like tone of voice or voice stress, those sorts of biometric sensors. But we do very much look at the words that are used and the tone that's used by looking at those words. So we can respond differently if somebody's clearly angry from if somebody's pretty happy and comfortable. So we have a service, we call it Tone Analyzer. It detects the mood of the person who's interacting with it, and Watson will respond in a manner that we've defined suitable for that particular tone. In terms of what Watson says and how it says things, that's something that we spend a lot of time working on, both with our customers, ourselves, and actually with some partners. We have a partner in Goldsmiths University who's done some research on tone of voice and engagement styles with chatbots. So we typically work on that with them just to try and get the right tone. Some people like a very clean, very efficient, very brisk kind of chatbot engagement. Others, a little more fun, a little more spontaneous. Depends on the organization and their brand attributes.
Over time, do you think things like emotional intelligence would be something that you would look to explore with Watson?
Emotional intelligence might be going a bit too far, but certainly an ability to understand the emotional state of the person that Watson's engaged with and being able to respond appropriately to that. Yes, we can do that today, and I'm sure we will extend that capability as we move forward. Genuine emotional intelligence, I'm less confident about that.
Can you tell us about a few other use cases that you guys are looking at or have looked at with Watson to date?
Yeah, so chatbot we've talked about extensively as part of this discussion. Another example of chatbot actually is what we call agent assist, where Watson effectively sits on the shoulder of a professional call center agent, wealth manager, private banker, and effectively offers advice to that banking representative or insurance representative, so that if somebody comes on the phone or is engaged in with a set of complex questions, then the person they're dealing with doesn't have to refer it to a kind of second line or expert division. Watson can effectively guide them through the process. It's the same technology as direct consumer engagement, but a different application, which is quite popular. More in the kind of commercial banking space. Other things we do, insurance underwriting we do. So effectively Watson reads the underwriting guidelines of the insurer. Watson reads a medical case, an application, if you like, for life insurance, say. And then when Watson reads about a particular illness that somebody might have, then Watson will look that up in the underwriting guidelines and then effectively apply a rating to that life and make a recommendation to the underwriter on how the case is covered. So we have a particular insurer doing that at the moment. We also have conversations with a bunch of insurers around commercial underwriting, that type of thing. Equally applicable in claims. Watson can also do things like read customer complaints, respond to customer complaints, classify them. It can do KYC, know your customer use cases. So Watson can read about the entity that the bank is proposing to transact with, be it a retail or a commercial organization, and help the bank to verify that the person they're dealing with really is the person they think they're dealing with. Risk and compliance is another use case. Enormous volumes of regulation, as you know, in the risk space. Take a human being months and months to read through that, whereas Watson can read it in less than a second and recall it very quickly. So Watson can help make that type of information much more accessible, and we hope in the future to be able to help organizations to apply procedures and policies based on the understanding of that risk. So lots of use cases now and those that will be developed over future months.
You mentioned that it's relatively early days for Watson from a high-level standpoint. If 100% is Watson has reached the natural extension of what it can do, where are we today?
I don't know if I could apply a percentage to it, but I would certainly say we're in the infancy of cognitive computing. So it's a very new discipline. If you look at more traditional forms of computing, they've been around for 40 years or more. We're 2 or 3 years into cognitive computing. So it's the beginning of a journey. I'm sure there'll be huge developments over the coming years. Certainly there's a lot of research and development activity going on within IBM to improve the list of cognitive services we have. Watson kind of came to prominence through its engagement in the Jeopardy game show 4 or 5 years ago. At that point, we had 1 cognitive service. I think we're now up to about 40 cognitive services. So there's enormous development and improvements going on, extension of those cognitive services. So I think we'll continue to see dramatic transformations in cognitive computing and big steps forward over the next few years.
It sounds like the potential with Watson is phenomenally transformative in terms of not only processes that it could potentially replace, but entire business models that could be disrupted.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There are a lot of things that Watson can do that will transform the way businesses operate. It's a very transformational tool. It's generating, it's able to perform knowledge work at high volumes and high scale. So it will be able to improve the quality, the performance, and the efficiency, I think, of knowledge work across a whole range of sectors, not just financial services.
Do you see Watson as improving the performance of human workers or replacing the need for human workers in the medium term?
So we're very much on the augmented side, so augmenting the work of human beings, so helping them perform better, more efficiently, more quickly. Iron Man rather than Terminator is our model.
I like that. It must be interesting for you guys to listen to and think about some of the higher level critiques, concerns, perhaps around machine intelligence and the likes of some very, very smart people out of Silicon Valley, for instance, expressing real fears about computer enhanced intelligence. Certainly, from an ethical standpoint, philosophical standpoint, an interesting argument. I don't know if you guys get too bogged down in that.
Not really, and I think it's it's 1,000 miles from what we do day to day. To help surface information that banks and insurance companies have, make it more visible to their clients, generate kind of automatic responses back to clients when they have a query or a question. We're a long way from the whole singularity debate and machines taking over and the fears that Silicon Valley and others have been expressing about artificial intelligence. It may be there's research going on in labs elsewhere, but certainly it's not an area that we should be concerned of in IBM.
I suppose it's beneficial to take the view that IBM does, that it's very much an augmented human approach to things as opposed to a human replacement. And it seems like the use cases are focused around improving processes, providing better information to customers more quickly, doing things that computers are traditionally good at, i.e. crunching numbers.
High volume,
exactly.
scale,
as opposed to emotional intelligence related activities, relationship building, and the like.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that human beings are good at. Creativity, spontaneity, poetry. There are things that machines are not good at, and they're most of those things. But what computers are good at is high performance, high scale, high speed, parallel processing. So we see it as a great kind of combination, really, to augment what humans do by giving them a tool, in the same way as new tools have been emerging for millennia.
Does IoT open up specific uses for Watson?
It does, yeah. So, I mean, IoT effectively gives us a range of sensors that Watson can read, and then Watson can apply cognitive reasoning to the information that it's picking up from those sensors, and then make appropriate decisions which are acted upon. So, the way I think about it is kind of Watson is the brain. Watson's making the decisions, making the assessments, and determining the most appropriate action, and the sensors are picking up the information that Watson needs in order to do its cognitive functioning. So absolutely, the two fit together. They make very logical sense working in partnership.
Are there any use cases that you would see as natural extensions of Watson?
We talk to clients about these much of the time. Clearly within financial services, insurance is one where IoT sensors can pick up external events, be they weather events or fire or flood or what have you, and then take appropriate action based on that. So those are probably the IoT use cases we're discussing most at the moment.
How adaptable is Watson to implementation requirements? I would imagine that large companies in regulated environments have all sorts of not only technical but also regulatory constraints around what they can implement, how they can integrate things, where data needs to be processed and stored. How adaptable is
so Watson's very adaptable. You'd expect me to say that. I mean, it's provided as a platform of services, API calls for those who are technically inclined. And those API calls can be called from existing systems within an organization. They are processed on the cloud, but we have 3 different cloud models depending on an organization's approach to risk and the use case in which it's being deployed. So we have a public service which is entirely open. We have a premium service which isolates a client's data at a virtual machine level. And then we have what we call a dedicated service, which isolates a client's use case entirely on the hardware. So there's no other client working on that hardware. So we have those 3 different deployment models. We also ensure that we don't put personal information up into the cloud, or at least we don't export it across international boundaries. So there's a range of things we do. We've never found a use case, or I haven't found a use case yet that we've not been able to do, not been able to implement for those reasons. Haven't had a client yet say, we can't do this because of our security constraints and what have you. It's true to say many large organizations are reassessing their cloud strategies. Most large banks until a year or 2 ago had a no cloud policy. They're all looking at that, reassessing that, and dipping toes in the water as they learn those skills. So it hasn't been an obstacle to Watson's deployment so far.
So it sounds like most of the implementations use cases so far have been IBM functioning as a back-end supplier to an existing organization and providing Watson to enhance their computing capabilities. Would IBM ever intend to develop a direct-to-consumer version of Watson?
I think it's unlikely that IBM would, off its own bat, build a direct-to-consumer application. We're very much a enterprise-serving organization, so we typically work with the banks and the insurance companies in the financial services sector. However, we do have a large ecosystem of partners who build cognitive applications, and many of those will build systems that operate directly to consumers. And in fact, Watson is already touching hundreds of millions of customers today, and our forecast before the end of next year is that we'll be up to 1 billion customers interacting with Watson.
When you talk about the reach of your ecosystem partners and interactions that consumers may be having, can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so they are organizations that are building cognitive applications using Watson technology. So typically they're application software vendors or IT services companies that are building applications for their clients.
I understand that you're focused specifically on financial services within Watson, but outside of FS, are there any particularly interesting areas or use cases that are being developed?
For me personally, the most interesting one is healthcare. So Watson is working intensively in healthcare. In fact, it was our first kind of industry that we focused on after the Jeopardy game show. And Watson is able to work alongside hospital oncologists in diagnosing and recommending treatment plans around particular types of cancer. So in that use case, Watson was able to digest all of the medical information, the teaching material, the research material, was then able to read the patient's medical files and medical records. And based on the symptoms and the findings of the medical tests, Watson was able to recommend appropriate treatment plans, summarize them for the doctor. If the doctor wanted to know why Watson was recommending a particular case, they could read the evidence behind Watson's decision. And it's very similar technology to that used in financial services, just happens to be in the medical domain. That's very interesting work.
Does Watson only work in English?
No, is the simple answer. English was the first language that we developed for Watson, but since we launched, we've now deployed Watson in Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Korean, Italian, and French. And I know there are a number of other languages in development. So it's got a pretty broad portfolio now of languages that Watson can converse in.
Is it easy enough to add a new language? Is it a question of training it in a new language like it would learn other information, or is it different? Yeah,
it's basically it's building what we call the natural language pipeline, teaching it the grammatical rules, the verbs, the nouns of a particular language. So it takes a few months of work of a team that specialise in building out Watson capability. So it's not a large task, but we've got lots of competing demands. People like me want more and more banking functionality. We have to choose where we make the investments, and we think we've got it about right at the moment.
Sure. You mentioned ecosystem partners before. The majority of the use cases we've discussed so far have been IBM supplying systems direct to primarily large incumbent organizations.
Yeah.
Is that the only distribution channel, or are smaller companies able to engage with IBM, leverage Watson?
Oh, very much so. So that's very much our model. So we encourage what we call our ecosystem of partners to build cognitive applications into their existing applications, or to create new services that use Watson technology. So we absolutely encourage organizations to do that. We very much want them to do that. And we hopefully make it easy for them to build those applications through the information that we provide on the web, through the pricing structures, all of that kind of thing. So we're very keen on motivating and incenting an ecosystem to work with it.
Great. Well, David Robson, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Rebank. If you like today's show, reach out. Follow us on Twitter at Rebank Podcast and join the conversation. For more on banking, fintech, and the future, check out our regular content at www.bankingthefuture.com.